What would be the point? What's the point of removing voter ID? I mean, Democrats are always talking about how much they hate the Electoral College based on a false accusation that the Electoral College dilutes one person, one vote. But what actually dilutes one person, one vote is when there's voter fraud.
Oh, absolutely. I can remember this used to be a fight back in Georgia about 5 or 6 years ago when they were trying to tell everyone that voter ID was racist. But the funny thing is that when voter ID was implemented, you had more of a turnout from the black community than had ever been seen before. I think, though, that if you're going to sit there and say, hey, voter fraud is only going to come about if people know how, or people can be identified for who they really are, then it sounds to me like you're the one trying to game the system. This has been an old tactic from Democrats for a very long time. It has never made sense. It never will make sense.
No, it's
Yeah.
completely false. Completely false. The argument against voter ID from the left is that it disenfranchises minority voters. So there's two things about this. First of all, that's insulting to suggest that minority Americans are somehow less capable of getting a government ID than a white person. It's certainly not about money because states that do have voter ID laws have provisions for people who can't afford them. So it's simply insulting. It also, there's no statistics that show that it causes minority voters to show up at the polls less often than white voters. It's identity politics is what they're trying to do. They're trying to play the race card where the race card does not apply in any way, shape, or form. It's simply not a valid argument. So in my opinion, that law is just to allow voter fraud. There's no reason to roll that back unless you want to allow it. Unless, of course, they have some other type of plan to protect against voter fraud, which, of course, they don't. So that's the first law. The second law is doubling the governor's term limit. Now, this in and of itself is not unconstitutional. It's not obviously insane. There are plenty of governors who have longer term limits than they do in Virginia. But why do you think that in Virginia they are trying to do that? To me, it seems like they're trying to make it so that the governor is less accountable to the voters because he could have a longer term in office.
No, absolutely. This is the Democrats. They've just gotten their power in Virginia, and they're going to try to keep it for as long as humanly possible by passing a lot of different laws that make it very hard to get them out. Not just the voter ID law, but this term limit, the increase thing. It's a little giving felons voting rights.
Yeah.
All of this is a power grab. That's exactly what it is, and you should, as an American, be 100% suspicious of anyone who tries to increase their power, especially this blatantly.